Hey there. Welcome to Shoreside's podcast series on voter access. I'm Rend Smith. So, recently, when I went to vote at a North Carolina voting site, I found myself getting a tad nervous. I immediately took out my ID and then I gripped it. And when a person who was a few people ahead of me in line blurted out pretty loudly that they knew the address on their license didn't match their current address, I got even more nervous. I moved around a lot. Had I remembered to update the address on my ID? If I hadn't, would I be able to vote? This episode, we go looking for some clarity about North Carolina's voter ID laws.
So this election in 2024 is the first time that a lot of North Carolinians are encountering this when they go to vote. And it came back as the result of a North Carolina Supreme Court decision that overturned a prior ruling. So we were really surprised when that decision came down, as were a lot of other folks. So what it means is that voters across the state, when they go to vote, will be asked to show an ID that is to verify that they are who they say they are. So voter ID, as we like to say, is about your face. It's about making sure that the picture on your ID matches the name that they have on your voter registration. My name is Amy Campbell Bogie, and I go by she, her pronouns. Go by Amy. And You Can Vote is a nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit that provides voter education, registration, and empowerment services across the state of North Carolina. We go out into communities across the state and talk one-on-one with voters to make sure that they are prepared and know what's on their ballot, that they know what the offices on their ballot actually do and how those offices impact their lives, that they know how to find trusted resources for candidate information, that they are registered to vote accurately in the location where they currently live, and help them overcome any barriers that they may have to accessing the ballot box.
Amy mentioned I wasn't alone in terms of being confused.
The address situation is probably the biggest piece of misinformation out there. And we hear all the time also from new residents to North Carolina, oh, I can't get a DMV appointment, so I can't register in North Carolina. So I can't vote this year. And we all know that North Carolina DMV is really backed up and it's really hard to get an appointment. So that is a huge barrier if that in people's minds, but it's not in reality. So there are other ways to prove your address. Voter ID is about matching your face and your name. And the address can be used to verify your address if you're doing same-day registration during early voting, but it doesn't have to be the address on your driver's license. So if you want to do same-day registration, for instance, you can bring another document to show, here, this is my current address, if the address on your driver's license is not up to date. Other forms of ID that work, U.S. passports and passport cards, college student IDs and employee IDs from over 100 different institutions across the state have been approved for voting. There's a list on the North Carolina State Board of Elections website. Also, a lot of government employee IDs will work, and military IDs, veterans IDs, tribal IDs. There's a whole list of things. Another thing to know for new residents to the state of North Carolina is that if they have just moved here and are registering to vote in North Carolina for the first time within 90 days of the election, and for this year, that date passed back in August, you can still use an out-of-state ID. So if you're new to the state and you haven't obtained a North Carolina license yet or DMV ID, you can still use your out-of-state ID if it's within 90 days of the election when you register.
So what I heard was one way to navigate all of this is just bring a lot of different stuff. When it comes down to it, if you're registered to vote, someone at the polls should be able to help you figure it all out. And we reached out to someone who could walk us through that.
So I'm Karen Brinson-Bell. I'm the executive director of the State Board of Elections. And in our state, that means I serve as the chief election official as well, because the State Board of Elections is an independent agency. We don't fall under the Secretary of State or anything of that nature. And so I'm I'm in charge of the day-to-day operations of the State Board of Elections, but also the oversight of all 100 county board of elections and how we conduct elections in this state. So we saw more voters turn out for the primary, and that gave us more opportunity to make sure that we were getting the word out. But we've put a lot of our energy and focus into making sure that people are aware as they come to vote in the general election, since this is when we see our largest turnout is in presidential years. So we did some advertising and public service announcements going into the municipal and the primary, but we've done a significant amount more as we've prepared for the 2024 election. So hopefully folks have been hearing public service announcements. We've had a television ad, we've had some billboards and social media campaigns to help us get the message out and really drive people to our website that gives the most comprehensive information. And that website is designed around the campaign message, which is bringitinc.gov. So bringitnc.gov. So bringitnc.gov. And, the message is, bring it, your vote and your ID for this election and all elections going forward in North Carolina.
If any of that sounds too complicated,
So we also offer a free ID opportunity for voters. They can go to their county board of elections at any point in time, except election day. Between the close of early voting and election day, we do not issue free voter IDs. But any other time a voter goes in, we look up their information, confirm that they are who they say they are based upon their, last four of their social and their registration information. And then we can take an image right there, put it into a template that we've created as a voter ID and print that and provide them with an ID that's acceptable for voting purposes. Generally, I don't want to commit the counties to being able to turn that ID around right then and there when the person shows up, because there may be other processes going on, like early voting or a board meeting or something like that. But generally, we can turn it around right then and there.
so what actually happens when you decide to show up?
What's going to happen is, you go to your voting place and you go in the doors, and hopefully there's a greeter to greet you. Hopefully we have enough staff in all our voting sites to do that, to direct you to the right check-in station and so forth. And at that check-in station, there will be one of those members of your community working as a poll worker who will ask you first and foremost to state your name and your address, because that's the first provision in our law. And so you'll do that. They'll look you up in the system. Many of our voting sites have computerized check-in, so they're going to type that in. But there are some that do the manual poll book method, where they will actually, go through the pages to find your name in the book. And then at that point, once they've located you as an eligible voter at that voting site, they will then ask you to show your ID. And, it's simply, a holding up of your ID. They might take it from you if, there's some distance between you and the worker, just so they can see it more clearly and identify, that it is an acceptable form of ID. The only thing that could happen is if your ID does not show a reasonable resemblance, then they may call over those other, what we call judges, they're the top three officials in the voting place, for them to determine, was there any concern? They could ask you for another form of ID potentially, but we're not seeing that a lot. I mean, we really mean it when we say reasonable resemblance. So, if people's hairstyle has changed, if people now wear glasses, if someone even has on a mask or a ball cap, those are fine.
Even if all that fails, you're still not out of luck.
So a lot of people will be able to just vote because they have one of those many forms of ID. And those are all listed on the bringitnc.gov website. But if they don't, then our law provided that We can also accept an exception form. So that's an exception for them. Or any voter has other exceptions, which could be that for religious purposes, you cannot be photographed. And so that would be an exception. We have the exception of natural disaster, which of course has affected a lot of North Carolinians because of Hurricane Helene, but that's already within the law. So that if we have other circumstances where someone's affected by a natural disaster within 100 days of the election, then they can indicate that's why they don't have an acceptable form of ID. And then the third exception is a category called reasonable impediment. And that could be any number of things. It could be in the list that's provided. It could be transportation issues. It could be a conflict with work or school. There's several items that are acceptable. It could be other, which is permitted on the exception form and permitted by law. So let's say, for example, you had a pipe to burst, whatever the correct way to say that is, in your home. And so your kitchen got flooded, and that's where you had your wallet or your purse, and your ID got damaged in that. And so you don't have an acceptable form of ID to show. And if at any point, be it about photo ID, be it about, whether your name's properly in the poll book or not, be it about the hours of voting, whatever your concern, if that first person you're dealing with isn't able to help you with your situation, just be patient, but say, I'd like to speak to the chief judge. And at all of our voting sites, there is a primary person who has had typically additional training, probably more time being a worker over the years, and they're ready to take you over to the help station and help you figure out what's not quite right, and can give you a little bit more attention to solve the problem, be it, again, photo ID, the fact that you weren't in the poll book. Our real goal at the end of the day in all 100 counties is that we want to see people be able to cast their ballot. And, where there's a will, there is a way, and we'll try to get you there.
I'm Rend Smith. Thanks for being with us.
Learn more about this series and others at shoresides.org.